Hey, thanks for checking out the ConveYour on Learning and Development podcast. Our aim is to help business leaders, trainers, and teachers level up their skills in learning and development in order to effectively train and equip their learning participants by discussing training tools, concepts, trends, and emerging technologies such as microlearning. This is Jason Kelske, your host, and this episode is a conversation between Stephen Rhyne, ConveYour's founder, and myself. We discussed the fact that learning has to be effortful. In fact, more than just being effortful, often learning is difficult, which is why the title of this episode is It's Not a Cakewalk. So we'll talk a little bit about the ancient view of learning, the science of learning as presented in books like Make It Stick and Microlearning Short and Sweet, and we'll give some practical ideas for helping learners to get over the hump of difficulty in learning. Before we jump in, let me point out that ConveYour is a microlearning platform that attempts to curb the difficulty of learning by providing a clean and intuitive mobile learning environment. For more information about ConveYour, check out our website, ConveYour.com, where you can also try out a sample of our microlearning platform. We'll provide a link for the sample course in the description of this podcast. Now, let's jump right into the conversation between Stephen and myself. Stephen, so this episode we're discussing the idea of learning being effortful, the concept that it's not just a cakewalk, and so we really want to elaborate on that and explain what we mean. And so I want to hear your thoughts. You want to hear my thoughts. So I think one of the things that we have come across specifically, we read Make It Stick. We have a write-up on it on the ConveYour website. So we're not going to rehash everything exactly, but one of the things that we have just made a point to continue to talk about is this idea of elaboration, reuse, recitation, and mixing up when it comes to learning. And when people hear that, it can be intimidating. It can feel like an awful lot. Yeah. And we don't want people chased away from, the fact that learning is difficult or it can be difficult. So let's just talk through these ideas of what does it mean to elaborate, reuse, recite, mix up? Why do this in learning? And I know I'd like to hear you with some of your thoughts on that, and I'd like to share my own thoughts. So
yeah. So do you just go back a little bit? Remember when we were talking about Make It Stick, and you were saying this is actually nothing new? Do you remember talking about that?
Uh-huh.
Can you talk more about that first, and then I'll go in and share some ideas I had about this?
Oh, yeah. So Make It Stick. Another book that we've been looking at is Microlearning, Short and Simple, or Short and Sweet. And the idea of learning, it's not new. As a people, we've been learning for thousands of years, obviously. So in the ancient world, the Greco-Roman idea, they had this thing that they called the trivium. And then they also had a quadrivium, but I'll just talk about the trivium just briefly. But the trivium is the idea that there's a grammar stage of learning, a logical stage of learning, or a dialectic stage of learning, and then a rhetorical stage of learning. So some people say grammar, dialectic, rhetoric. Some people say grammar, logic, rhetoric. But the grammar stage is, it's why we have grammar school. It's the lowest stage of learning for the youngest learners, where there's a lot of reciting, there's a lot of singing of songs and chanting of facts, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that kind of thing. Because repeating
that was
things
really nice, by the way. Good
I didn't do let me A, B, C. Okay.
That was good.
Wow. That we just went there. But so they sing in order to ingrain what they're trying to learn.
Yeah.
And in so doing, that's why we remember these songs all through our lives, because we ingrained it at a young age. Mm-hmm. And so as the youngest learners develop in this grammar stage, eventually they get to a point where they want to know a little bit more. They want to dig deeper, and so they start asking questions like, "Well, why?" So I've got 7 kids, but a couple of them are at this point where it's like, "Well, why? Well, why, Dad? Well, why is the sky blue? Why is it red at night? Why?" And you're like, but they're at this stage where they're trying to understand relationships of what they've already learned.
Hmm.
That's the dialectic
Yeah,
stage.
they're learning, like the grammar stage. They're learning things in such a way where they don't really know how they correlate.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
And at the grammar, and then in the dialectic stage,
and then,
they
yeah.
do start to. But then that's not where learning ends. It's not just knowing a why. It's not just knowing the facts and the why. You're really not a true learner. You really don't fully grasp something until you can tell somebody what it is that you know, which is the rhetoric stage. So we get the idea of rhetorical questions, or questions that are to make you think and come up with an answer. And that's that stage. The final stage of learning is this idea of being able to talk about what you've learned and express it using your own thoughts. And until you can really do that, learning has just been maybe it's just been somebody else's thoughts that are embedded in you, and they're not
Yeah,
really truly yours.
yeah,
So
that's
again,
really good.
Make It Stick talks about these: elaboration,
Yeah,
reuse,
elaboration.
classification.
Elaboration is kind of rhetorical, right? So I'm
Yeah,
able to elaborate on what I've learned. I'm not just, consuming and spitting it back out. Right?
definitely. Yeah,
Yeah, this is we have this written down, like your learning experience can't just be consumption of information, uh, because again, that's not even the grammar phase, right?
yeah,
Because if you go all the way down to the first level, that's not even the grammar. I mean, that would be like consuming the alphabet and memorizing the symbols, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
then that's all. And we commonly see consumption, with the expectation that people will only need to be able to recite that within the next week, and then they pass a course because they can recite it within the next week, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
within hours of being in a workshop, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then saying, oh well, they passed because they checked all the boxes, because they can pull out of their short-term memory something that somebody said, and check a multiple choice question, right?
Hmm.
So the the common thing, we were talking about golf, right? You want to talk about that a little bit? This idea of golf. It was funny you were writing this up in our blog post, but talk about that a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I mean, even to stay along the same theme as ABCs, right? The teacher doesn't stand in front of the class and sing it for them. That would be ludicrous, right? Or so in the same way, when you want to learn to golf, you don't learn golfing by paying an instructor to play 18 rounds, and you're driving them around drinking a beer,
Yeah,
going, "Yeah, this is it."
yeah,
And back to the idea of learning through phases, our kids get really frustrated when we do everything for them, and they get to a point, especially maybe it's just our boys,
true. Yeah,
but they're like, no dad, let me do it. I know girls do that too, but
yeah. No,
we
I hear what you're saying. I try to demonstrate that. Well, let me have the club, and I'll show you how. No, 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 no. Like, you're trying to make me skip, as if somehow they're just going to watch it and assimilate exactly how I did it, versus
yeah,
actually failing through that swing, and starting to feel the muscle memory and everything.
yeah, muscle memory,
This,
yeah.
yeah, but how do you say his name? Laozi? Leo.
Lao Tzu.
I'm going to go with you on that one. So
I think it's
to
Lao Tzu.
know and not to do is not yet to know. Like, I've
Hmm.
always heard it: to know and not to do is not to know at all, right?
Yeah,
Um, and so the doing, obviously, that a lot of the training that our customers are putting people through, there's still the doing part, right? But then there's really a model of this: consumption, 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 do.
yeah,
Not consumption, consumption, elaboration, consumption, recall, in the courseware, or
yeah,
in the micro learning experience or the training experience, and then try to do out in the real world, right? It's just like,
yeah,
consume big video, go do, right? Then tell us
yeah.
how it went. So it's kind of strange. There's this giant chasm in the middle, right?
There
Um,
is.
so one thing I know is backed by science. They talk about in the Make It Stick, and this idea of spaced repetition, um, and we see that in our kids' schooling and stuff too. But one example I like to use, with spaced repetition. So the concept of spaced repetition, um, they talk about, we remember things best right before we're going to forget them and are
Hmm.
forced to recall that information.
Okay.
So that's when you grow the synapses, right?
Yeah.
It's when we are, we actually I'll give ourselves an affordance to fail, and we try. I'll use the credit card example, right? So we get a brand new credit card, and for like the first week out, many weeks after we do pay for something online, we're constantly pulling it out, and we're at this crutch, and we're just typing it in based off of the card. And they're like, this is really annoying. I don't want to do this anymore. We won't talk about like 1Password and how much easier it is just to put it in 1Password or LastPass. But if you take that card out and you actually don't look at the card and you try to put the numbers in, it doesn't feel good when you're doing it.
Yeah.
But as you're doing it, you start to really get confidence because you start landing a few of the numbers, right? And then eventually, because you fail, you get the feedback loop, you look at it, you start putting the numbers in, and eventually you have the confidence to put the whole number in, right?
Yeah.
So it's that yucky feeling where you're trying to pull it out of your memory and rely on your memory, oneself have the confidence to do it. That's the learning aspect, right? That's the memorization. And you could say that with either skill-based stuff or concepts that you have to understand, or even just facts that you have to know. And I just want to soapbox on the facts thing real quick. I think in our society, we really pushed towards this idea of like fact memorization. Somehow drilling for that type of stuff reduces our ability to be creative. And in that book, right, they talk about that's not true. I mean, it's the whole case in point. We don't want a doctor that's creative, right? We want the one that knows how to do all the things and has memorized these things to the T. And it's those doctors that know those things to the T, or the violinist that knows the stuff to a T, that has done effortful work to get there, that comes up with the craziest, newest, most elaborate new music, right? Because they have that basis. So
I just had a mental picture of going to the doctor, and he's looking at some like weird thing on your skin, and as he's looking at it, going, yeah, that's really weird. I don't even,
starts Googling it or something.
Well, is it?
Sir, why do you have WebMD open at the same time?
Yeah, you're like, I could have done this at home.
Yeah,
but that would be. You're not paying that guy. Well, you are paying that guy, but still, like you don't want to pay that guy. So this something that we see a lot of, and I know you said this and explained this before, but you see a lot of people. The training that they do is consumption. And like in the old day, you used to, if you wanted to like exercise or get in shape, you just go buy the video of people exercising, you pop it in the VCR, dating ourselves, but and you'd watch this, right? But the problem was that it was them doing the work and you're the individual not doing it. You see this in the world of training as well, though, in the business world, where it's like, we're going to watch this video, we're going to consume. I think of The Simpsons. Hi, I'm George McClure. You remember me from such,
I remember those.
The walkthrough, Phil Hartman. But you see a lot of that. Why do you think we see so much of this? And then you also, with as much of that consumption that there is, there's still so very little learning.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Actual learning result. So, first, I think it does come with capabilities of platforms. I mean, it started there. So and what people are used to in terms of how we make content online. Okay. So, I mean, we went through the big, wave of blog posting, right? And embedding video. And so what's the form we have now for our e-learning is kind of like the blog post with a big long video and, maybe you pepper in a quiz or a PDF or something like that. So it's really just like website publishing, but put into a course model. Okay.
Yeah.
So now if you were going to take that and say, well, let's ratchet it up. Let's add more exercise. Let's add more recall and elaboration, exercises and stuff that we do, right? With microlearning. Then you would end up with like an extremely difficult to pass course. It would be a lot of work.
It's so
It'd be
long, right?
tons of consumption and tons of exercise.
Yeah.
And then, it's like going to the gym for 2 hours and being expected to do squats and deadlifts and Romanian deadlifts and pull-ups and just you just be gassed, right?
Yeah.
So it's just really, really painful. So the concept of separating time and effort, realizing that time and effort are not the same thing, right?
Hmm.
Lots of time does not mean a lot of effort, right? We can all go to the gym and walk around, talk to our buddies, and do a few sets and strut our stuff, and then come back and do another set. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah.
Or we can go.
Wait,
In for
what do you mean?
30
I know what
minutes.
you're talking about. Thanks.
Or we can go for like 30 minutes, and we can just just go hard and intense, and all those trainers are real. If you ever had a trainer like really train you, they are really big sticklers on the amount of time you rest.
Yeah.
And I never realized how like, okay, no, you don't get 5 minutes before your set. You get a minute and a half. It's horrible actually, but so another example is like violin practice or any other practice of like a skill. They did research where they found like the people that really making gains were the people that practiced every day, but they practiced very deliberately for a tight period of time, where they were looking for a specific outcome.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't people like, I'm going to pick on guitar players, right? So many guitar players, what it is about, they like to play for a long period of time, but they never fully play a song. They play half a song and then they switch to another song. Why do you guys do that?
Those dumb guitar players. Sorry.
Yeah. But it's that the deliberate practice, right? So if you can take that model of deliberate practice and bring it over to a course. So let's say you take a course that used to be really long, it's a bunch of consumption, it has some effort because of the amount of time you spend, but you could break that up into very deliberate, effortful pieces of training, and then allow people to recover and marinate on the concepts between days, right? Or between hours, whatever. But I mean, we go to these workshops for strategic coach, part of an entrepreneurial coach group, and they do such a good job of the flow, like you sit down, they'll talk at you for a little bit, right? Where they're talking about a concept and they're talking about the value of the concept. And then they give you this time where you're, really intensely thinking about your own practices and you're writing them down, right? It's facilitation. And then they give like so many breaks. Okay. So many breaks. I mean, there's always like a 15-minute break, a 10-minute break here and there. There's never more than, I think, maybe a 30-minute block of actual intense stuff going on. I don't know. I could be wrong on that, but it's really valuable to see what it's like when you allow people to focus really heavily for a second, do hard work, and then give them. It's high intensity training, right?
Yeah.
So how can we make our training more of a high intensity? That could be 10 minutes a day, right, of high intensity learning. Where they're having to recall, elaborate, connect ideas together, write down their own thoughts to facilitate action, track what they're doing, say how many times have you done this week, all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah. You making it again, and this is all the same stuff the reusing, mixed learning, elaborating, space learning. Yeah, that's good. When it comes to the learning, I know we wanted to discuss this idea of people needing to have the liberty to fail, and you actually talked about this a moment ago when you were referenced the the credit card, and you remember best when you are about to forget it, and there's something about that failing allows you to actually learn. But that does assume that you're going to allow your people to make mistakes.
Yeah. And I see this so much. I see that there sometimes is a culture of the testers, the people going through training, that they're so squeamish to get the wrong answer. Okay. And the trainer is so scared to create questions or create learning experience that would cause people to stumble. Okay.
Hmm.
I constantly ask them to consider the idea of throwing people out in the deep end, right? With their training, using it for litmus testing to really help people understand where they are in a concept. Um, I'll give you the perfect example. Kind of brings it home for people. It's this idea of like an all of the above multiple choice question, where it's
Yeah.
just like these very very like um, soft alley-oop questions where everybody gets the answer right. Like, is that
Hmm.
really helping anyone? You
Yeah.
know,
No.
and it actually is just kind of an eye roller for the learner because they just, this is wasting my time. Like I, everybody knows that this is the answer. And
Hmm.
common thing is we see scores where the max score on a experience, let's say, is 1,200 points or something like that, and they get 1,100 points as the average score. Okay,
Yeah.
so and like everybody's getting it right. There's almost everybody's got the answer correct. That is cool, but it's not actually creating a feedback loop for and putting questions out there that people really have to think about, that results in real consideration that they need to go back and review that information, or
Yeah.
ask one of their colleagues for help in that area, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Or it doesn't give the company any sense of what they really need to focus their attention on for larger training experiences, like on a workshop,
Yeah.
right? If you're coming back with like, oh, everybody's good at this, like,
It doesn't
how
help. Yeah. It
doesn't help
doesn't help.
anybody.
Yeah.
Doesn't help anybody.
They-
So
they start the training because people aren't performing, and then they run the training and everybody's answering all the right answers, and so you go, well, everybody knows it, but no one's performing.
yeah, yeah. So
Huh.
really, I mean, I don't want to ruffle feathers, but is it because you just want a completion of a course, or do you want to actually create? Do you want to actually create that vacuum in the learner's mind where they're going, oh man, like there's real fear, like there's real, not fear, but there's really a gap here that I need to fill in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I see a little bit of too much of the participation trophy, mindset, right? In training, and I think that comes a little bit too in the learning and development world, just because uh, let's just put it out there, like the HR world is really relational, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Very relational with people, and they really care about people, and they don't want to feel like um, there's deficiencies or make them feel down or any of that type of stuff. So in that case, what you have to do is reinforce the value, like reinforce for the learner um, uh, the chance, like reinforce, hey, congrats on going through this. I know you got a score down here. That's so exciting because it means you can learn more, right?
Yeah.
So you celebrate the failure, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I mean, we use this term, like thing in our house, fail often, fail early, fail forward, right?
Yeah.
Or is it fail early, often, then forward? Either or. But okay, my daughter, right? You give her, she knows something, like she absolutely knows how to do this word, spell this word or do this math problem, but she's scared to fail.
Hmm.
Just do it. I know you know the answer. Just do it. And she just like, no, I really need a hint or something like this, right?
Yeah.
Trust yourself. Trust yourself to try, because a lot of this, a lot of what this all of the above type of culture does, like answer this question all of the above, is it reduces the chance for the learner to actually feel confident about what they actually know.
Yeah.
Because if you're not actually giving the chance for them to hit the 90 mile per hour fastball, and you're
Hmm.
always softballing it, right? Then do they feel really confident and equipped that they know the answer,
Yeah.
right? Wouldn't they feel more confident to get it wrong? Then company sees that they get these harder questions wrong, then provide them and equip them with the right answers for those very difficult questions, and then now they're really confident. That's what they really want. Do they
Yeah.
want to be confident because they knew I feel passionate about this topic, right? But do they want to feel confident a false confidence, or do they want to have real confidence
Yeah.
around that? So that's my wish for effortful learning, is that the culture becomes one that it's okay to fail. It's okay to give your people harder than they're used to types of questions and exercises, and then everyone learns from that result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If people are going to have when you talk about this baseball thing and the 90-mile-an-hour fastball, right? It's a lot harder to hit a softball that's gently tossed you. It's a lot harder to hit a home run with that.
Oh, good point. Yes.
Than it is if you've got a 90-mile-an-hour fastball coming at you. You're more likely to hit the home run there because the momentum of the speed coming at you is going to go further. So people aren't succeeding partially because you're actually not giving them the tool to develop the confidence. That's at least what I hear you saying. I think
that's right. Yeah. And because what we know is that in the real world, they're not getting softballs.
Yeah.
Right. They're getting the fastballs.
Pummeled.
They're getting the curveballs.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so what can we do to get the training closer to what's really conducive, in terms of understanding a concept and elaborating on it, and I keep using those terms, just kind of recall on it, right?
Yeah.
I was in chess. I was in chess in elementary school, like first chair in elementary school. And the instructor always said, what you're doing is you're learning. This was like the grammar phase, right? You're learning these tactics.
Okay. Then
you learn how to bury them into your game. Right?
Yeah.
And it stuck with me when I was a kid. I was like, oh, you're learning tactics, you're learning that grammar phase, right? And then you're figuring out how they work together.
Yeah.
For strategy.
It's exactly it.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks again for checking out this episode of ConveYour on learning and development. If this episode has been an asset to you, we'd love it if you went over to our social media sites and let us know by liking, commenting, or sharing. We're on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Vimeo. Also, let us know if you have any questions or if we can cover a topic that would be helpful to you by emailing me at jasonkk@conveyor.com. That's Jason followed by the letter K @conveyor.com. Until next time, keep up the good work.